morning that you...
Well, I wanted us to sort of continue last week
Okay.
when we were talking, uh, and we got sidetracked, and you really gave me some insights when we got sidetracked and talked about the laying in of
Highway.
the highway,
Yeah, that's right.
and how that led to the integration of
The housing.
in the
Mhm.
city. And you were starting to tell me about something about the housing developments that are existing now.
Well, we're not exactly preempted, but did you see the state journal this last week? They had a whole uh, page, 5 or 6 pages on the housing developments in City of
Actually, I
Lansing.
haven't read that yet because I was away, and so I've got that whole roll of paper.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
That'll bring you up to date on some things, many things I find quote. And that's another thing. Being you're talking to me about it, I allowed the state journal to take some of my papers I had over the history, and she quoted some of the material that she found in my papers, which is historic. 25 years ago, we started running around the state to find housing which would be comparable to what we needed in Lansing, and that's what we developed. But it was a new experience. Everything that the changes throughout our community are new, and I've been privileged to have a part of some of the changes. But I think that a housing profile in that paper would give you additional information on some of the changes and some of the developments of the developments. They call them development rather than public housing. A lot of people still quote it public housing, but there's a stigma on public housing nowadays. So they call them housing development.
Now, a development such as Pebble Creek, I live across from Pebble Creek, which is income-based housing, is that city or...
No, I don't think Pebble Creek is city. What I know of the units, I think that's developed by private developers, but they possibly got some Section 8 money, which federal government subsidized. Private developers could get some Section 8 money and develop for what they call low income or disadvantaged families, and a certain amount of money is paid by the government. But Coronado Gardens out there next to Mount Vernon is a private enterprise development, but it's different than the public sector. Public housing.
Do you think it's partially this sort of scattering of the black community then that has led to very little in the way of... Lansing hasn't had as much demonstrations and boycotts and
Well, I'll tell you, Lansing is conservative whites and conservative blacks. It has never, to my knowledge, outside of when they did protest the city and developing Human Relations Committee in '63, that they marched on City Hall, and they marched in this veranda out here, and the mayor then developed a Human Relations Committee. They also have had a protest movement. As you know, the ministers got together on the Martin Luther King Boulevard. Outside that, there has never been too great a degree of a public clamor, organized militancy that you find in greater cities where the leadership really goes after the system. I think in Lansing, it has been a difference that they have been able to work together when there has been a crisis that caused some of the white leadership and the black leadership to get together at the table, rather than the militancy that you find in other communities. I think the conservativeness of let's keep the lid on it has worked out. I believe that we've had a pretty good community and work. For instance, in Lansing, like many other communities there, we had the biracial committees. Churches developed some, and naturally this Human Relations Committee evolved from some of those racial strife in the '60s. And of course, naturally, the Michigan Civil Rights was developed right here in Lansing, which encompasses the whole state. But I somehow believe that even though we had Christ, and then of course, at that time in the '60s, we had some ministers. I can remember Bishop Coles, and there were Reverend Patterson. He was one of the first on the Housing Commission, who was a low-key person, but his emphasis on doing things, getting involved, was very productive. Bishop Coles, I remember in the housing going to I-496, led his church to have meetings on the highway and the community. People won't realize that, but that type of thing, in getting the highway involved with the people who are being displaced and talking things over, I think made a lot of difference than allowing people to be militant from the outside. And that, to me, served its purpose. In many communities, you would have the two rivalries of whites and blacks really had to protest and demonstrate, and even civil disturbance in order to get their attention. Lansing, we had some small isolated cases of civil disturbance. We were able to go out in the streets and we won't say police control, because the community worked. The community purpose, people worked out there. In fact, when I was out of town in 67, 68, and we had a few disturbances, Joel Ferguson took up the reins and he went out there, and at that time he made a name for himself. And he later became a council person because he was out in the street with people. I think people in Lansing were concerned about what was happening, even though I still respect the fact that it was a conservative community. Nobody wanted to make the changes and turn over, but when it did come to a so-called crisis nationwide, they did get together and worked it out. I think that made a lot of difference, because as I'm speaking to you now and trying to recall history, people will forget the Reverend Pattersons, who rode around the state, and I rode with him, with 3 or 4 people, and that's things we need to get the names, around the states to find out what kind of housing we should have in Lansing compared to other cities. And Reverend Patterson's gone, but from that developed the Leroy Furrow housing, the Mount Vernon housing, because there was 7 to 8 people rode around the state to find out. I remember going down to Inkster, went up to Midland, because it already had some public housing. And then Bishop Coles on the highway went through, would come down here to the city, and he'd meet in the state, and we would talk with the state officials, highway officials, on displacement of people. Also, the NWSB was active in bringing suit against the highway of what they call displacement relocation without cause, and giving people adequate notification and stuff like that. But outside that, it seemed to just resolve with the work, quietly working of the people. But people never recall that. How many meetings that the ministers at that time met with the highway, and some people now take credit, and they weren't even around, would take credit for the relocation. But I remember Bishop Coles very succinctly allowing his church to be open in the meetings they had down in the kind of confrontation to people. But the people had a chance to voice their concerns. But that's history.
Now this was mostly at this time in the biracial or the Human Relations Committee that was working on that issue.
Well, we also, that at the same time, the mayor developed a housing department, which in turn worked with the housing to develop the housing commission. Now, like I say, the person who was human relations director in '64 was moved into a special housing department, which to help develop the housing commission, and therefore. At that time, '65, I came on the scene to become human relations director. But there was a tremendous process developed to assist people in housing because of the so-called displacement, industrial displacement. Oldsmobile was also buying out, and the highway, and they knew that there was going to be some problems, because Lansing was not prepared for low-income people to be displaced. And that's primarily who it was, the people in that area over there in Oldsmobile section, and and I-496, the highway. And as they were building at that time, they were building subdivisions. But we're still in subdivisions. They may not have been channeled out there or shown those as much as the young people were coming in and getting jobs, were moving into those. It was younger people moving into the subdivisions. For however they allowed them to have certain buying power, at least they had it to move into subdivisions, but minorities were not moving into subdivisions, at least they weren't channeled, because there were certain, at that time again, which is hard to put your hand on, discriminatory practices of realtors showing them only certain areas. It wasn't until you'd find that there was concentrated areas of minorities being in certain areas would you know then that there was a move on to see that they relocate in certain areas. And that's one of the things the city was very much concerned with. Even the Realtorship Board finally come onto the scene and worked with us in what we called equality housing. And they went on record that they would monitor those real estate salespeople who were channeling people into certain areas. As they knew, they probably knew it before it happened, but it was brought to their attention.
They had to notice it.
Yeah, but it was quite obvious that, and the thing that was found that there were certain conditions that they would offer people in buying those people that were far more attractive than an expensive place that they, however they would put it down, to buy out in a suburb or some other areas where whites were located, which would sometimes discourage minority from buying out there. There were various tactics used by salespeople, and I'm not saying all realtors were doing it, but there were certain salespeople that were discouraging minorities from moving into certain areas. And there were certain salespeople who would discourage whites from relocating in areas where minorities were beginning to relocate. So it's a difficult thing to put your hand on, but it was blatant racism at that time. And I know the area of McPherson up there, West Side Neighborhood Association, had to form its own little clique to say, hey, we want an integrated community. We do not want all the minorities moving into this area. We want whites to be channeled in here too. And at that time, they took a very strong stand. And you'll find that area west of Jenison, up there around Section High School, all through, is fairly maintaining a stable. Although there are many minorities who have moved up there because they're very good homes, and you cannot blame them for purchasing homes that are. But at the same time, they were beginning an exodus of whites moving out into the suburbs. And you will find that area is west of Jenison to a large number of minorities who have certain economic backgrounds that could afford them that type of housing too, and because they're very good homes.
Yeah, I've driven through there. It's very nice area.
Very nice area. But then you can't. One cannot develop an prejudice against minorities who want the better homes if they're available, even though at times you'll find that they're developing another black community. But the homes are there. So it's one of those darn if you do and darn if you don't. But,
of course, the area is so. I mean, now they have so many nice homes all over the place that people don't need to. Although sometimes people feel.
But there's one thing about it. You'll find, like when they started moving out, there was this development called Marmore out here off in Waverly, which is a very I won't say expensive community, but there were not many minorities moved out there. Not that they wouldn't channel them up, but it was very expensive. And although we have some minorities who had the financial background to have moved out there, they wouldn't move out there. Now, another thing that happened in our community, which is there was a developer who bought some property out here off in Holmes Road, and he started trying to sell lots to minorities who had some funding into that area, which is Starlight Lane and Holmes Road, right next to Trinity's church out there. And many blacks were offered the opportunity to buy lots and have their homes built. And they did. You'll notice Dr. Kennedy's out there. Leonard McConnell had a home out there. And, oh, there's many of them all up and down Starlight Lane. And people started putting a label on it. It was a black subdivision. Because they did sell properties. I was offered to buy property out there. You could buy a land and have a house built for you. Very reasonable. But it did cause a segregated area. But it was kind of a suburb. Then at the same time, the church moved out there later on a piece of property just north of that Starlight Lane. You know, Trinity Collins. Well, it used to be Collins because Collins used to be on Pine Street right down here. And then Collins Church moved. The minister had foresight to say the highway and the government's coming down is moving people south, and the government is going to take that property going west here of the Capitol, which they did off in Pine Street. So they purchased property out there off on Holmes Road and built that church and changed it to Trinity AME when it used to be Collins AME down here on Pine Street. So there was a lot of changes there.
So did many, but that subdivision didn't become all black?
Oh yes.
Oh yes.
Oh yes. Oh yes. I don't think, to my knowledge, there was any whites that bought out there. Oh yes. And then across the street, in the area going south, was an area called Churchill Downs. And realtors were really channeling blacks into that area, Churchill Downs. And until the whites began to wake up and find out there were a number of blacks all up and down the streets, like Stillwell, Wainwright, Sumter. There were about 4 or 5 streets, and when the people started drawn to our attention, human rights attention, we found out that realtors were channeling blacks out there. We found 42 families in a 5-block area. And so we started surveying how they happened to get out there. Well, they would offer them a good deal on their house, and they move. At the same time, they were offering people out there a good deal to move into the suburbs across the street from Waverly, and the whites are moving from Churchill Downs into the new suburb being built across the street.
And actually outside the city limits.
Yeah, I was on the other side of Delta Township. But it was a kind of a checker board top. They moved these people over here into this subdivision and moved the blacks from the highway and industrial Oldsmobile relocation out to Churchill Downs. And it was made a point in our survey that they were actually showing them those houses before they showed any place throughout the community. And that's when we come on and got with the realtor board to make a concentrated effort to monitor their salespeople, to ensure that they encourage them to sell to minorities throughout the community, rather than just channel them out there. Secondly, the people out there in Churchill Downs went on record of forming a committee, and they even put signs, and I hope I have that as a matter of history, they put signs on the lots. We like our neighborhood and we want it integrated. And some would put on, we do not want to sell our property to keep the fellows from coming to their house and trying to, what they call block busting. Oh yes, there was a case over in Pattongill area where a realtor would go to the house and tell them that there was a minority who lived down the block. Didn't they want to sell their house? That's what they did over in McPherson area. They would say that it was a changing neighborhood, and they had a house, and they would offer the white owners a chance to sell their house. They would take them off the market, and then they had a client who was ready to buy their house. It was a vicious cycle, but it did happen.
I guess that's sort of what I live on Coolidge Road.
Out of East Lansing, right?
Yeah, the east side is East Lansing, the west side is Lansing. And I've had people, when the livestock exchange moved there it's Saginaw and Coolidge.
Mm-hmm.
So many realtors called me up and said, I understand you want to sell your house.
Mm-hmm.
What gave you the idea? I want to sell my house. Well,
Sure.
now that, all this commercial stuff is moving
Mm-hmm.
there, blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah.
Sure. And that was the manner in which many of the salespeople, because the realtor itself would admit that their salespeople are doing this, because it's hard to put your hand on the actual conversation salespeople would get. But when we started making a survey of the people, how they make contact and how were they approached to buy to sell their property, we found out that they were using these tactics. And we went public. I suspect I have news clippings showing how we did go public.
Well, in addition to the, say, the housing, what other sort of interventions has the city?
Well, naturally, we had, like I say, we had some civil disturbances where people were, especially Martin Luther King, when he was killed at the time, we had some, like throughout the nation, people were very disturbed about the concern, white concern, and there was some civil disturbances in our community, and the city worked with that. We've had sensitivity training for police department. I think we need to have some more. Some of the unfortunate thing that we're finding is that racism, after 20 years, that 64 was the civil rights, through the 60s we had, and here it is, 90 now. 20 years later, racism began to raise its head by some of the young people who maybe weren't even around in the 20s when we had the right, or were kids. And for example, just yesterday, I'm having lunch with a group of young men, and this one person who happened to be a doctor who's living in Okemos, who is a black doctor, was telling that he woke up yesterday morning, went out, and they had rotten eggs and tomatoes on his car, and he lives in an all-white neighborhood. He said it was the only car in the neighborhood that had tomatoes, and then he's telling about a neighbor just about, I forget the time frame, was it 2 or 3 weeks ago, his kid come back and said the neighbor said he did not want his kid playing with this black kid anymore. And so this racism is beginning to develop even in places like Okemos has and other places, wherein we have it right here, of people who are beginning to, and as I speak of the number of cases we're receiving in this office of hiring terminations and treatment of people on the job so that they make them feel uncomfortable, so they, like the people say, I think they want me to quit. And which has been the past pattern of black people, that when they get fed up with harassment, as we call nowadays, insulting, demeaning behavior, they say, well, I quit, I don't want to work for that old so-and-so, and they quit. And when actually we know in this day and time that's the reason why they're being harassed and intimidated, and they will not use the laws that's in effect they can against this type of behavior. But it is beginning to surface that I'm sure one of the reasons, as I say, I'm sure my own personal observation, is that the competition for jobs is so great, and there's so many people unemployed, white, blue collar, the cousins and uncles and friends that are unemployed, that when they look up and they see minorities and women having those jobs, they are angry. And I think it surfaces when they have to deal with minorities, and so if they can make them feel uncomfortable, if they happen to be in a supervisory position, they're ready to get rid of them. And that's why we're having this type of behavior, I believe. It's unfortunate that the economy, when competition comes about, somebody's got to go. And like they used to say years ago, and I still believe it to be a fact, last hired, first fired. Although we have a process, civil rights, and like our human relations and others, to challenge those type of terminations, or that type of action because of the laws, some people are still not using it. They'd rather just quit. But there is. The new law is ethnic intimidation. They didn't put racial intimidation, which means the same thing, but there is a new law, ethnic intimidation, and we find it very prevalent. And The only thing about it is unfortunate that some minorities can be had and don't even know they're being had on the basis of termination, get caught in a bind of calling somebody. For instance, this is very prevalent in this day and time. Minority takes off, calls into somebody like they're supposed to do, and then when they come back to work, the supervisor said they never received the call. Well, the person they called never told the supervisor, or there may have been a friend, and say, "Well, I'll tell them." And they never tell them. Then it's on the record that they say they never took the call. And with that type of process of screening a person out, their behavior, they say, "Well, we have it on record. Look at how many times it took off and they didn't call in." And so they have reasonable cause to let them go. But that happens. And they say, "Well, I know I called sometime. I called them and they said they would call." Well, that person didn't have any responsibility to tell the boss or supervisor that they called in.
In fact, that person, after that happened the first time, they should have made it a point to send a certified letter, or you can send telegrams by your phone. So instead of
But see, that's our middle. You and I are middle class behavior. We could do that, but the people who are just average people, they don't think in terms of that.
But after the first time, you would think they might think of it.
Well, it's like a lady who's having problems with an institution this day, and the head operation who had to be in Grand Rapids did come in yesterday to talk with them. Over a period, she's been having worked the 8th month, and was getting insulting remarks like, "You shouldn't be working here. We don't need any blacks. They happen to be the only one working in this particular facility. You shouldn't be the Ku Klux Klan run you out of here, and they ought to come in and beat your black so and so." That type of conversation she claimed was going on, and she would tell her manager, and the manager said, "Well, there's nothing I could do." And then she went to the supervisor above that and said, "Well, I don't run this particular unit, but we'll see what we can do." And then nothing is done over this period of time that they see what they're going to do. Nothing is done, and she still was incurring this type of behavior on these people. In fact, in one of the people she was working with, their boyfriend came in and assaulted her, and she told security about it, and security told the person not to come in that area of the agency anymore. And yet she was just called just day before yesterday and said that person was standing outside the door. She had to call security, and her supervisor, who knew that she'd been told not to come, that the person not to come around, still would not enforce it. So she would see that type of a program sometimes, which supervisors and other management personnel allows to continue. You can never tell whether it's not a conspiracy of trying to get that black out of there. But then you have to call the top officials who maintain we have non-discrimination policy, and they'll look into it. Then we'll see if they will do something. Other than that, take a complaint of racial discrimination. But it's hard to put your hands on it, because when the person does not document the time and instance and does not have a witness, it's their word against the other person's word. So it's very difficult. But it's like civil rights. You can tell them civil rights, but maybe 2 or 3 months, and the person's still undergoing all that type of harassment, and civil rights can't get to it. We can get to it, but we try when that person comes to get with them. Like in this case, I did call Grand Rapids officials, and that person was coming in, the personnel, what do they call herself, personnel analyst, something. Anyhow, she said, "I'll be right in town. Tell the person I will meet with them this afternoon." So they did supposed to come in yesterday afternoon and met with the individual. But up until that time, nothing had been done. I would hope that in our workings that we can get the system, the powers of the system, and as I speak to you now, going through my mind, which I guess I have privilege, and you should have privilege of, IBM, Toyota, Kibachi, and all of them now are going to boycott and take their money away from all golf tournaments that did not have black membership. You've seen that.
Yeah.
It takes the powers that be, the money that speaks, to make those changes. But if the powers that be and the ones that the movers, just allow discrimination to continue, it's going to continue. Because the people on the lower levels that discriminate. The people up here put out the policy, but if they don't monitor that policy, discrimination is going to continue. So that's where I'm at. And you ask all these other changes. There's a lot of changes taking place, but somehow there's not enough people on the lower level down here that are crusading or even getting involved in the policy making with the bureaucrats where changes can be made. They don't want to sit on those boards. Too time consuming. They don't have time. I'm speaking about those black leaders who occupy prominent positions or seats in Oldsmobile, state government, who are not on public action programs or agencies where they could make a difference just by voicing their opinion on what's happening. United Way of Michigan, just this last 2 years, I've been able to, being on nominated committee, been able to get 5 to 6 blacks on that state committee. In fact, 3 years ago, I was able to get nominated as a vice president, a black attorney from Ypsilanti, and he, this last year, became president of the United Way of Michigan. But as I sit in that 5-person committee, nominating committee, the challenge was, this person's too abrasive. He will lose the image of United Way if we put him in as. And I said, ma'am, the lady who was opposing his nomination, I said, you know, there was a time when your name came up and they said you were a pushy broad and you made a pretty good president. And another fellow who happened to be a personal director of Hudson said, you know, Dick is right. At least he'll have 2 years to see whether he has the ability to be president. But at least he'd ought to be given the chance. And he did become, and he was strong. Because one thing about this fellow, he was an attorney, and when he had his mind set, he told people like he didn't beat anybody's tongue. He did become a good president, and he did. But when he said something, of course, they would always say, "Well, I guess it's your legal background that caused you to be that way." But he knew what he was talking about, and he kept things straight. But he made a good president. In fact, they gave him a standing ovation this last year, right here in Lansing at the Clarion, when they gave him his award as retiring president. But he did make a good president. But I had to point it on there. Vice President of the University of Michigan nominated him as the vice president. But he won't make the meetings. He won't make the meetings. So what they're talking about, and I hear it in them little groups, well, if he can't make the meetings, he'll be a poor president later on. He can't make it as vice president because they have 4 vice presidents and they move up the line.
So within the city government, are there any people who are coming up who could move through say, from the lower levels up into middle management? And
that's the thing. You see, city government does not pay too much for entry-level jobs when you go to state, and if you've got any ability, or Oldsmobile, or even Michigan State. And some do not take the time awaiting the training. Now, naturally, coming up through the ranks, Jackie Warr, who has Human Resources Director and she's female black, has been there a long time. Now, whether or not she ever thinks in terms of retiring and somebody take her place, there's nobody over there in her shop that could probably take her place. They'd probably have to go outside.
Is she very near retirement?
Well, Jackie's been here a long time. She was with Model City. And take myself. The only thing about this particular case here, myself, this job position, is that because I think in this way, because I have over the last 25 years sitting in this seat have drawn a certain clientele to support human relations, they keep this particular job. We have a job to do, but this job could be commingled with human resources which in many communities they put human relations and human resources, and they put the title on one doing the job and put all the people in. But they're not doing an adequate job because sometimes things slip through the crevice. Right in this job over here, having known what's going on, I can stay right on top of it with the staff I have in training. Now, what could be done, and probably I would do if I get responsible people, is join the two staffs together if Dick Les left, and let the staff in this group work under human resource. Now, in that case, not that it couldn't be factored out, but they also may take the person, equal opportunity officer, and put them in a department responsible to that department head. That also curtails the responsibility of that individual because they have to report to the department head, who may not be as concerned as I happen to be, not the ego, but as I find the difficulty of working sometimes department enforcement on the affirmative action and equal opportunity or contractors and prevailing wage things, because I'm independent, I'm responsible to the mayor and council. So therefore, I don't have to be responsible to department heads. I can ensure that they say that the contracts have to pay prevailing wage, the contracts have affirmative action programs, and we monitor that. We also monitor the department head to see that they are monitoring them. So a little bit different of that type of process when you could cover it over by putting these workers under those departments.
In fact, that has been an issue at the state level, and the affirmative action officer actually reports to a department director as opposed to in the past they report to personnel.
And you see, that's the difficulty when you do that. You stifle what I feel. Now that's a personal observation. You stifle the ability of the individual to be independent in their thinking, because you're really thinking what the director wants you to think, and your process can be stymied.
We've got a meeting right there, and we're just about the end of that too.